Ubuntu has been around for about 18 years, and during that time has had many releases, most of which with fairly questionable names, with the next release being Lunar Lobster. But like basically every distro, it had a fairly humble beginning, with its first release being Warty Warthog 4.10. And unlike a lot of projects out there, the entire bug history exists in the exact same bug tracker that can be found over on Launchpad. So have you ever been curious what the first bug in the history of Ubuntu was? Was it related to maybe a package, maybe some sort of installation issue, maybe the desktop it's running, or maybe something else in that range? Well, the answer is no. It's nothing like that whatsoever. Is it possibly like what Wine did, where literally the first 8 bug reports were all testing to make sure the bug tracker actually worked correctly? It wasn't that either. What it was is this. Microsoft has a majority market share. This bug report was made all the way back on September 20th, 2004, before the first release of Ubuntu, and wasn't just made by some random person who knew that Ubuntu was coming out fairly shortly. This was made by Mark Shuttleworth, the founder and current CEO of Canonical. Basically the guy who started everything for Ubuntu. Now, he did ultimately close the bug report a couple of years back, and I'll get into why he did that in just a bit. But before we do that, let's find out what the bug report's all about. Microsoft has a majority market share in the new desktop PC marketplace. This is a bug which Ubuntu and other projects are meant to fix. As the philosophy of the Ubuntu project states, our work is driven by a belief that software should be free and accessible to all. Ubuntu is free, always was, always will be. Free software gives everyone the freedom to use it however they want and share it with whoever they like. This freedom has huge benefits. At one end of the spectrum, it enables the Ubuntu community to grow and share its collective experience and expertise to continually improve all things Ubuntu. At the other, we are able to give access to essential software for those who couldn't otherwise afford it, an advantage that's keenly felt by individuals and organizations all over the world. Which, knowing he also was involved in making the Freedom Toaster, it absolutely makes sense why this was the philosophy of Ubuntu. So non-free software leaves users at the mercy of the software owner and concentrates control over the technology which powers our society into the hands of the few. Additionally, proprietary software stifles innovation, maintains artificial scarcities, and enables malicious anti-features such as DRM. All the way back in 2004, some people were already thinking about DRM, surveillance, and other monopolistic practices. Now, it'd be nice if this bug didn't exist, but it is very easy to replicate. This bug is widely evident in the PC industry. Steps to repeat. Visit a local PC store. Attempt to buy a machine without any proprietary software. I like how they say proprietary software in the context of Ubuntu, considering what Ubuntu is nowadays, where it's not really afraid of proprietary software, but sure, without any proprietary software. What happens? Almost always, a majority of PCs for sale have Microsoft Windows pre-installed. In the rare cases that they come with GNU Linux operating system or no operating system at all, the drivers and BIOS may be proprietary. Once again, Ubuntu has sort of changed its philosophy over the years. Nowadays, it's pretty much the same. Obviously, if you build your own system, then do whatever you want with it, but most of the time when you go to a PC store, you go to a tech store, whatever you want to call it, most of the computers there are all Windows machines. You'll have a Mac section, and maybe, possibly, they'll have a device from like Lenovo or Dell that ships with Ubuntu, Fedora, things like that. I haven't found, at least in Australia, any PC stores that sell machines without an OS installed. And a lot of PC sellers don't even have that as an option. I'm sure they do exist, but it's definitely not the norm. So let's see how this bug should be fixed. what should happen? A majority of the PCs for sale should include only free software, and then links to places like GNU.org, Debian.org, and then weirdly also opensource.org with the documentation on what open source is, which is not free software, like that's a different thing. And maybe it's due to the fact that back in 2004, Linux was even more niche than it is today, where you wouldn't really be using it because of software support, you'd mainly be using it because of ideological reasons or money. You don't want to pay for a Windows license, and you couldn't find another way to acquire it. But it seems like a lot of the comments on here, at least the initial comments, are really positive and sort of playing along with what's going on. Here in Romania, only the big magazines are selling the PCs with Windows pre-installed, and the little ones are selling their systems with Linux, various distros, but installed in a manner that makes the computer useless. And you may be curious, like, how many comments are actually on this bug report? Well, it's certainly not a little report. There is almost 2,000 comments. Now keep in mind, comments only count people that are actually saying stuff. They're not counting things like tagging other distros. So if you go and view all the comments, this is going to happen. Give it a moment. By this is going to happen, I mean nothing's going to happen. Every time I try to go and view all the comments, it times out and doesn't actually work at all. This bug tracker is not made to support this many comments. But what I do find really interesting is this first comment actually set a trend. A lot of the comments that came after this were discussing what this bug is like in their individual countries. Now, a lot of people are in places like California, like Australia, and places like that. I don't really find those cases very interesting. The ones I do find interesting are like this one over in Poland. So in Poland, this bug is not as significant as elsewhere, as most of the ready-made computers are sold with FreeDOS or some other flavor of Linux, Aurochs and Mandriva predominantly. The only exception are the laptops, where only HP and Acer sell notebooks without Microsoft software pre-installed. Maybe this is because in Poland, we aren't as rich as people in other countries. But it's not just Poland that has an interesting case. We have Brazil here. Here in Brazil, there is a manufacturer which is starting to distribute a custom Ubuntu as default operating system option. Or how about Indonesia? Here in Indonesia, the bug is very serious, widespread. We're trying hard to fix the bug. A couple of months ago, Microsoft Indonesia swept all of the internet cafes that use an illegal copy of Windows. After that moment, most of the internet cafes started using Linux as their operating system. It's a good start to introducing Linux to Indonesia. Now, most of the computers store installed Linux in newly built computers, including laptops. And finally, a story from Burma. Our country has refused to sign the international copyright and patent laws up to now, so it is perfectly legal to use pirated software, mostly Microsoft Windows and related products. Even Microsoft with its enormous legal team cannot sue us. There's almost no software industry here. PC clones are assembled and sold with pirated Windows and any popular software you name, pre-installed by hardware vendors who also undertake the responsibility of Windows Help Desk. All other software maintenance is done by users themselves by using manuals, pirated copies again, and learning from private software courses. However, things must change sooner or later. At the time when the international IP laws came into effect here, all computers in Burma would grind to a halt since very few would be able to afford license fees. Who would help us to boot our computers at that time? Ubuntu, I hope. But guys, don't worry, it's not actually a bug, it is working exactly as intended, as Mr. B. Gates here says. As far as I'm concerned, this behavior works as expected, it should be marked as a feature, not a bug. But eventually someone brought up a very good point. I must ask a question. This bug that faces not only Ubuntu and Kubuntu etc, but Linux in general. And because of that, a lot of things are marked as affected. Things that I don't know why they're even marked. Some of them have literally nothing to do with the bug. It's just let's mark things for the sake of marking it. So we have things like LibreOffice, where I guess you could argue with like the document suite, but has nothing to do with the distro. A bunch of random distros are tagged as well, like Club Distro, Computer Science Ubuntu, I guess that's technically an Ubuntu, Jack Linux, I don't know if that's even a real thing, TV Player, and then things that are not even using Launchpad like Arch Linux and Fedora and other things like that. I think my favorite tagged project is Dylan.net and Dylan.net Reflection. I don't know what these are. I don't know if they're even real projects. If you go to the bug tracker, they have a single bug there. So, did someone make this for the sake of it? Their name is also Dylan? I have a feeling they just made this page for the sake of attaching the bug to it to add more things to the list. This list is an absolute mess. But the funny one in here is Wine, because Wine didn't just assign it to themselves, they also mentioned it in their own bug tracker. The original Win32 API implementation is still more popular than Wine. Opened in 2007, bug number 10,000. Now, some people here were willing to have a bit of fun with this. This depends on having very good and complete documentation. Currently, even though MSDN contains many errors, that documentation is more complete. Actually, the Wine source code is a much better documentation of the Win32 API than MSDN. But eventually Dimitri, one of the maintainers, saw this and wasn't exactly a fan. What is this bug about? Is it a joke to just take a bug with the number 10,000? I'm tempted to close it as invalid. Popularity is not a technical merit, closing as invalid. Closing. I don't know why he had to have like 3 comments to say that he's closing it, but hey, he did that. And Dan Kegel said, think of this more as a milestone rather than a conventional bug. But even though it got closed, people just didn't care. Hey, it's still present in this version, it's present in the Git version, it's present in that version. And that just kept going and going and going, and at some point, they eventually did reopen the bug, and today, it does still remain open. But sadly, in the current year, no one knows about this bug or cares about this bug anymore, so the last comment was in 2017. And as for the Ubuntu bug, this one got originally closed back in 2013. Now, I'm not going to read this entire thing, but the TLDR is the way that we approach Linux, the way that people are actually using Linux, not just in the Linux space, but in the general public, has very drastically changed. Keep in mind, back in 2004, Android didn't exist. Nowadays, there is this mainstream device and mainstream class of devices that all run Linux. Yes, it is a heavily modified Linux. It is a heavily, locked down in many ways version of Linux, but they are still running Linux. And as for Linux in the web space, Microsoft isn't this giant antagonist to Linux anymore. They will happily use it for many of their projects, whether that's on Azure, whether that's with WSL, which didn't exist back then, but nowadays does. You see a lot more acceptance of Linux into this mainstream tech space. It's by no means the major operating system, but it's also not this tiny niche thing that only a handful of people use. But there is a social element to this bug report as well, of course. It served for many of us as a sort of declaration of intent, but it's better for us to focus our intent on excellence in its own right, rather than our impact on someone else's product. In the many years since this bug report was filed, we've figured out how to be amazing on the cloud, and I hope soon also how to be amazing for developers on their desktops, and perhaps even for everyday users across that full range of devices. I would rather we find a rallying call that celebrates those insights and leadership. And I think overall that's a fairly good message. Now, considering the weird history the early bug tracker in Wine has, you may be curious about the bugs that came after this first bug. So the second bug is nothing. It doesn't exist. As for the third bug, that is when the bug tracker actually starts up properly and, you're getting actual bugs. I don't know why the second bug doesn't exist. I don't know if this is a testing bug they deleted. I don't know if I'm being trolled from 20 years ago. Either way, the second bug doesn't exist, and it really does bother me. I tried to go and look back on archive.org. It doesn't exist there. From all I can see, it's just not real. And seeing as though Ubuntu has changed over the years, how about you let me know how you've changed yourself? Are you more accepting of using proprietary drivers? Are you, less accepting of it now that it's become a thing that you basically always have to do? And how do you feel about Linux becoming this more mainstream discussed topic with things like the Steam Deck and other handheld devices coming out? I would love to know. So if you like this video, I'm going to go and like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon, subscribe, and Robertson, linked in the description down below. I've got a podcast called Tech Over Tea. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.